Picture this: an emperor standing naked in his opulent palace, his skin shimmering with gold dust as he screams to anyone within earshot that he is the sun incarnate. Meanwhile, his loyal guards are methodically strangling dinner guests, whose only crime was blinking without explicit permission. And here's the twist that makes your blood run cold: that wasn't even Caligula. When we think of Rome's most notorious madman, Caligula immediately comes to mind. He's the poster child for imperial insanity, the man who allegedly made his horse a senator, who dressed as various gods for his own amusement, and who supposedly bedded half the Senate's wives simply to combat boredom. But what if I told you that Caligula was practically a model of sanity compared to some rulers throughout history? Hidden in the shadows of antiquity are emperors who make Caligula's antics look like harmless pranks. We're talking about rulers who literally skinned people alive believing it would cure their headaches, kings who drowned entire harems based on a single whispered rumor, monarchs who hosted elaborate dinner parties with ghost guests, and leaders who appointed rats to official government positions with complete seriousness. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you view historical madness. These 11 emperors represent a descent into depravity so complete, so utterly unhinged, that by the end of this journey, even your strangest coworker will seem refreshingly normal. We're about to slide down a blood-slicked staircase into the darkest corners of human power, starting with number 11 and working our way toward absolute madness. Rome's gender-bending rose assassin. Imagine a reality show called Extreme Royals. Elagabalus would have been the breakout star that viewers couldn't look away from, no matter how much chaos ensued. Crowned emperor at the tender age of 14, this young ruler treated the entire Roman Empire as his personal playground and experimental theater. His very first imperial decree set the tone for everything that followed. Every citizen must worship his favorite deity, a massive black meteorite from Syria that he called Elagabal. Yes, he literally replaced Jupiter, king of the Roman gods, with a space rock. But theological revolution was just the beginning of his performance art. Elagabalus elevated dinner parties to deadly spectacles. He would host elaborate banquets where the ceilings were rigged to dump endless cascades of rose petals onto his unsuspecting guests. What sounds romantic quickly turned lethal. Some guests literally suffocated under the fragrant floral avalanche because their emperor found mass death by flowers amusing. But perhaps most shocking for ancient Rome was his complete disregard for gender conventions. Elagabalus regularly appeared in women's gowns, demanded that courtiers address him as empress, and offered staggering sums of gold to any surgeon brave enough to attempt transforming him physically into a woman. One day he might appear dressed as a goddess draped in silk, the next as a high priest in purple robes, sacrificing animals before his beloved meteorite. His marital life was equally unconventional: 5 wives and at least 2 husbands. One of his male spouses was a chariot driver named Hierocles, whom Elagabalus proudly introduced to Roman society as the Empress of Rome. The man certainly had range. Eventually, Rome collectively decided they'd witnessed enough madness. Soldiers butchered him and unceremoniously dumped his naked body into the Tiber River, the Roman equivalent of the ultimate pink slip, except the emperor himself became the pink slip, as Nero. The rock star who burned his own city, Nero might be the only person in history who responded to frantic cries of, "Rome is burning," with "Someone fetch my lyre." The legend of Nero playing music while flames consumed his city might be exaggerated. But one thing remains crystal clear: this emperor lived for drama on an unprecedented scale. He established his reputation early by murdering his teenage stepbrother, then turning his attention to his own mother, Agrippina, who had been effectively running the empire from behind the scenes. His first assassination attempt was almost comically elaborate. He tried to kill her in a staged boating accident. When the boat collapsed as planned, Agrippina swam to shore like an unstoppable horror movie villain. Frustrated by her survival, Nero simply sent assassins to finish the job with knives. His romantic life reads like the script of the most disturbing soap opera ever conceived. In a fit of rage, he kicked his pregnant wife Poppaea to death. Then, consumed by grief or perhaps just boredom, he discovered a teenage boy named Sporus who bore a vague resemblance to his deceased wife. Nero had the boy castrated, dressed him in women's clothing, and married him in an elaborate ceremony, because apparently that constituted closure in his twisted mind. As for the Great Fire of Rome, historians strongly suspect Nero orchestrated the blaze to clear prime real estate for his new Golden House, a sprawling pleasure palace featuring a giant rotating dining room and walls encrusted with precious jewels. Once the city lay in ash and cinders, Nero conveniently blamed the Christians and executed them in horrifying ways, including turning them into human torches to illuminate his garden parties. When the Senate finally declared him a public enemy, Nero fled the city, sobbing dramatically about how an artist was dying in him. Before plunging a knife into his own neck, the empire collectively exhaled in relief. Commodus, the emperor who thought he was Hercules. Commodus represents what happens when unlimited power meets unlimited delusion. Essentially, the Roman Empire's answer to a shirtless social media influencer who just discovered steroids. The son of the great Stoic philosopher, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Commodus inherited the throne and immediately declared himself Hercules reborn. He strutted through Rome draped in lion skins, carrying an enormous club and posing for statues like he was filming an ancient workout video. But his true madness revealed itself in the arena, where Commodus didn't just watch gladiatorial combat, he became a gladiator himself, fighting hundreds of matches. Of course, his opponents were typically blindfolded, bound with ropes, or armed with wooden swords while he wielded real weapons. He slaughtered exotic animals, giraffes, ostriches, elephants, in front of screaming crowds while senators wept into their togas. Each appearance cost Rome a small fortune, effectively bankrupting the empire so their emperor could play dress up as a mythological hero. His ego knew no bounds. He renamed Rome itself Colonia Commodiana and demanded that all 12 months be renamed after his various titles. Eventually, his own mistress decided enough was enough and poisoned him. When the poison worked too slowly for her liking, she enlisted a professional wrestler to strangle him in his bath. Ancient Rome didn't mess around when it came to performance reviews. Domitian, Rome's paranoid tyrant, picture living under a boss so consumed by paranoia that he lines every palace wall with polished mirrors, constantly checking for assassins creeping up behind him. That was daily life under Domitian, Emperor of Rome. He began his reign as a reasonably competent ruler, but paranoia gradually consumed his sanity. Domitian executed senators for alleged conspiracies, sometimes based on mere rumors, sometimes simply because they sneezed at an inappropriate moment. He demanded that everyone address him as Lord and God. In casual conversation, you couldn't simply say, "Good morning, Domitian." Protocol required, "Good morning, Lord and God." Nothing screams secure leadership quite like mandatory divine flattery. But Domitian's darkness ran deeper than megalomania. He reportedly forced prominent Roman women into sexual servitude at his private palace parties. Refusal meant permanent disappearance. Eventually, his own wife helped orchestrate his murder. Palace staff stabbed Domitian to death in his own bedroom. Rome immediately attempted to erase him from history, smashing his statues and chiseling his name from monuments. That level of posthumous hatred speaks volumes about his reign. Caracalla, Rome's brother, killing psychopath. Caracalla's story unfolds like a Shakespearean tragedy, except with exponentially more blood and far less poetry. At age 23, he murdered his own brother Gaeta in their mother's arms, Gaeta's blood splattering across her gown while soldiers hacked him to pieces. Caracalla then ordered the destruction of every coin, statue, and painting featuring his brother's face. He even executed 20,000 people accused of mourning Gaeta's death. Caracalla fancied himself the new Alexander the Great, marching east on grand military campaigns and slaughtering entire cities over minor perceived insults. In Alexandria, he invited the city's leading citizens to a festival, then massacred them all once they had assembled unsuspectingly. His end was fittingly undignified. Caracalla was stabbed to death while urinating beside a road, a pathetic conclusion for an emperor who believed himself divine but ruled like a rabid animal. Harza Justinian Ireeve, the noseless nightmare. Justinian Sue's reign proves that sometimes losing your nose should serve as a clear sign to retire from public life. He ruled the Byzantine Empire in the late 7th century, starting out as a decent leader before descending into full tyranny, jacking up taxes, torturing nobles, and executing anyone who dared breathe disagreement. The people finally snapped, rebelled, cut off Justinian's nose, and exiled him to Crimea. But this man embodied the original, "I'll show you" mentality. Justinian spent years plotting his comeback, forging alliances and scraping together an army before sailing back to Constantinople, sporting a solid gold prosthetic nose. Imagine this figure shimmering into the throne room with a gleaming golden beak, demanding renewed loyalty from his former subjects. Once restored to power, he embarked on a revenge tour that makes modern action movies look restrained. He ordered mass executions of everyone who had opposed him, overflowing prisons with heads rolling, then began randomly murdering people just to remind everyone who held power. Eventually, the empire reached its breaking point. His own generals betrayed and beheaded him, proving that golden noses cannot save you from karmic justice. Fes Ibrahim the Mad, Ottoman excess unleashee. They called him Ibrahim the Mad, and the nickname was richly deserved. He spent the first 22 years of his life locked in a gilded cage within the Ottoman palace, a luxurious prison designed to prevent potential heirs from plotting coups. When his brother died, Ibrahim suddenly became sultan and essentially lost his mind. First came his obsession with fur, not just wearing it, but covering everything in it. Walls, ceilings, pillows, furniture, his palace transformed into a gigantic teddy bear nightmare. Even during sweltering summer heat, he would strut through Istanbul wearing sable cloaks so heavy he could barely walk. But fur was merely the appetizer. Ibrahim developed a particular fondness for very large women, sending agents across the empire to find the fattest woman alive. They returned with a 330-pound Armenian woman nicknamed Sugar Cube. Ibrahim was so enchanted that he made her governor of Damascus and provided her with a royal stipend. Then paranoia struck. Convinced that his 280 concubines were unfaithful, Ibrahim had them all tied into sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus in a single night. All 280 women. Only one managed to escape the river alive, and her tale spread throughout Europe as proof that the Ottomans had completely lost their collective mind. Eventually, the court decided Ibrahim posed more danger than value. His own mother ordered his execution. He died strangled by his eunuchs, probably with fur-lined ropes. Thars Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the mercury maniac Qin Shi Huang, unified China in 221 BCE, built the first Great Wall, and gave the world the magnificent terracotta army, genuinely impressive achievements. Unfortunately, he was also completely unhinged. The emperor lived in absolute terror of death and desperately wanted to achieve immortality, dispatching expeditions to find the fabled islands of the immortals. When those quests failed, his court alchemists began feeding him mercury pills, literal liquid metal, claiming it was the elixir of life. Instead, it slowly poisoned his brain, transforming him into one of history's most paranoid individuals. Under mercury-induced madness, Qin constructed a sprawling network of tunnels connecting over 270 palaces, allowing him to travel without anyone knowing his sleeping location. He never spent 2 consecutive nights in the same bed. Anyone who leaked information about his whereabouts was executed along with their entire family. He ordered massive book burnings to erase history, ensuring China's legacy would begin with his reign. Scholars who protested were buried alive, approximately 460 of them. When he finally died from mercury poisoning, his officials were too terrified to announce his death. They hid his rotting corpse in a carriage, surrounded by carts of rotting fish to disguise the smell, until they could return to the capital. Today he rests in a gigantic underground palace filled with rivers of liquid mercury, because nothing says eternal life quite like marinating in poison for eternity. As Valentinian Iwis, the exploding brain emperor, Valentinian II took the throne as a child, but his claim to historical infamy was his explosive temper, literally. Witnesses described his violent rages, noting how his veins would bulge from his forehead until they appeared ready to burst. One day, while screaming at an envoy who dared bring bad news, Valentinian's eyes rolled back, his face turned purple, and he dropped dead. Modern doctors believe he burst a blood vessel in his brain during a temper tantrum. He didn't die from execution or assassination, he literally exploded from his own rage-fueled aneurysm. The man died from anger itself, truly losing his head as emperor in the most literal sense possible. Here's Adolf Frederick of Sweden, the man who ate himself to death. Sometimes depravity manifests not through cruelty, but through sheer gluttony. Adolf Frederick, King of Sweden during the 18th century, wasn't particularly cruel. He didn't drown concubines or hold mass executions. But he earned his place on this list by dying in possibly the stupidest royal manner ever recorded. On Shrove Tuesday 1771, Adolphe Frederick sat down to a meal featuring lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and copious champagne. But that was merely the warm-up course. For dessert, he devoured 14 servings of his favorite sweet, semla, a Swedish pastry filled with almond paste and whipped cream. 14 servings. His stomach distended to the point where servants thought he might literally explode. Moments later, he collapsed and died of digestive complications. Swedish historians politely record him as the king who ate himself to death. Imagine being remembered for centuries not for diplomacy, warfare, or reforms, but because you couldn't stop eating pastries. Ass Henry's the walking biohazard. Every list of depraved monarchs leads inevitably to Henry Vesey, England's favorite marital executioner. We all know about his 6 wives and his break from the Catholic Church when the Pope wouldn't authorize his divorce. But textbooks omit the truly horrifying details of his final years. By the end of his life, Henry Vesey weighed approximately 400 pounds on a 6'2" frame. His legs were covered in ulcerated wounds constantly oozing pus. The stench of rotting flesh followed him so intensely that courtiers could identify which room he occupied from 3 rooms away. His doctors drained pints of pus daily from an open wound in his thigh. He required custom furniture to support his massive bulk and needed a mechanical lift to mount his horse. His eating habits were absolutely insane. Breakfast alone consisted of half a roast chicken, half a pig, multiple pies, and gallons of ale. But here's the truly horrific conclusion. When Henry finally died in 1547, the gases from decomposition built up so intensely in his bloated corpse that his lead-lined coffin burst open overnight. His bodily fluids leaked onto the church floor, and in the morning, dogs were discovered licking up the remains of the once mighty King of England. A man who broke the church, executed his wives, and ruled with terrifying absolute power ended up as dog food. If that isn't cosmic justice, nothing is. So there you have our rogues gallery. Emperors so completely unhinged they make Caligula seem like your slightly eccentric uncle who collects garden gnomes. We've encountered rulers who drowned entire harems, poisoned themselves with mercury while seeking immortality, and literally exploded from pure rage. We've witnessed palaces transformed into fur-lined funhouses, dinner parties featuring ghost guests, and kings whose leg ulcers could clear entire banquet halls. If history teaches us anything, it's this fundamental truth: absolute power doesn't merely corrupt, it drives people completely insane. So the next time your boss insists on scheduling a 7 a.m. meeting, remember it could be infinitely worse. You could be forced to watch them strut through the office wearing nothing but gold dust while declaring themselves the sun god incarnate. Perspective, my friends, changes everything. At least your strangest coworker hasn't declared war on an ostrich yet.